Hail to all the Knights of the Realm. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host, Le Sieur Daniel de Crin.
Hello and greetings.
And we've got a new podcast for you all. The Plantagenets, The Kings Who Made England by Dan Jones. Yes, this will be a book club of a sorts. There's a lot of historic elements, and we're mostly going to be going by what happens chapter by chapter and gradually unfold the history contained within. And this will allow us to do a slow but detailed examination of each historic figure, as well as Dan Jones's notes on each. Now, some figures I may not take a look at other books at, such as Guillaume Lathelin, which, now for Guillaume, William, for our English audience, but we're going to go with the French names because actually the French names are more accurate. These were Normands, so they were not English. If you spoke to them in English, even the Anglo-Saxon tongue of back then, they'd have looked at you in confusion and bewilderment. And then probably rage, because a lot of them had really bad tempers. I'm serious. A lot of these nobles were just ill-tempered brutes. Not all, but some. Although, not all of them were as cruel as most of our nobility today. So, go figure. That said, we open Dan Jones's magnum opus, I guess you'd say, for monograph books, with the burning of the White Ship. This is a traumatic event, worse than 9/11 was for America, because this saw the flower of the nobility of Normandy and England, as Dan Jones calls the nobles who die on the White Ship. The ship hit a rock and sunk, or in other parlance, it swam like a brick. And the result was that this caused a succession conflict that lasted for a while and is often called the Shipwreck of England. Yeah, that's one way to put it.
It killed off an entire generation of nobles and heirs.
Yeah, mostly royals. But the other problem is it opened up the pathway, or the doorway, one might say, for those who are ambitious to try to make grabs for the throne, such as Etienne de Blois. Etienne de Blois, or Stephen, or Stephen, here we'll call him Etienne. This is actually the more accurate name. So, deal. And the thing is, this event took place on November 25th, 1120 AD. And you can find it on page 3 of the Plantagenets. I will occasionally mention page numbers. Don't worry. This way, if you have a copy, you're not going to get lost. Don't worry. And when I say the page numbers, I'm referring to the paperback edition that I have here. 200 young nobles, approximately, of Angleterre and Normandy sunk to the bottom of the sea. This is unimaginable. Like, this is as if, to an extent, I guess, a good chunk of Parliament was suddenly to pass away along with all their family members. Doubtless some would look forward to such an event, others wouldn't. It's not for us to take sides. At least not on the air. And the thing is, most of these youths were, as it tends to be the case with a lot of nobles, very, very, very drunk when this event happened, which is not uncommon for trust fund kids of any era. And so, yeah, this was not a good time. And the boat was commanded by Guillaume Lathelin, or Guillaume the Atheling. And Atheling was a title for the Crown Prince of England long before the era of the Normands, and long before Prince of Wales was even a title. Actually, I kind of think Atheling is a better Crown Prince title, and it sounds much more English than Prince of Wales. Because part of me almost feels bad for the Welsh, because yeah, no heir has ever really said, "Oh, I'm going to go to Wales for fun, and I'm going to rule there, and I'm going to be a responsible crown prince." Oh, okay, there was one, Arthur, but after he passed away, the rest basically said, "Screw that! I'm staying in London, or whatever property is in the south or Midlands of England." He was the son of Henri le Premier of Normandy, and yes, I'm going to say Normandy, not England. England was a valued piece of property by Henri, but the more valuable prize was Normandy, which he had conquered over the course of his reign in a bit of a reversed conquest. So his dad was Guillaume the Conquérant, or Guillaume the Conqueror, William the Conqueror, who conquered England. But the thing is, eventually in the reign of, well, sort of, you had William or Guillaume Rufus, Guillaume le Rouge, or the Red, who was a really bad monarch, was assassinated by his brother Henri. And yeah, I know people will say, no, he wasn't. It was just it was an accidental arrow shot that did him in by his brother. These things happen. Right, okay. So anyways, Henri assassinated his brother, and this is not a conspiracy theory. Like, we all know it. It's just that historians don't like to say this happened. I don't know why. It's just they think that it makes them sound like conspiracy theorists, I guess.
I mean, JFK might have been accidentally shot.
Yeah. But the thing is, Henri ended up doing away with one brother, made a grab for the treasury and the throne, and then when Robert, his oldest brother, the legitimate heir, came back from the Crusades and went, "Hey, what are you doing with my property there?" This? And proceeded to conquer Normandy and take Robert prisoner. So, as said, I'm conquering is what I'm doing with your stuff. So, this is the history of Henri le Premier. Very successful general, but he was, okay, in terms of expansionist and consolidation, these two, I guess you could say, political choices, Henri was always more for consolidation. Admittedly, he had given a good chunk of the north as property to the heir of Scotland, but he always wanted to maintain good ties with David, or David, as we should call him. David was a really competent earl and was ultimately very loyal to Henri. So there was actually no reason to really think ill of giving the heir of Scotland so much land in Northumberland.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy was loyal, more loyal to Henri than to his own brother. And Henri was married to David's sister. So the thing about the Scottish and the English royal families at this time is that they're family. They're very interconnected with each other. And Mathilde, who was a female lady of the line of Cerdig, or Curdig of Wessex, that is to say the royal line of Wessex, because her mother was Margaret of Wessex, and Margaret was sister to Edgar, who was the heir of the Wessexian line, that is to say the lineage to which Ilfrid the Great belonged to. And there were two other royal lines to England. One of them had died off, Canut's line. The other was Harold II's line. Arguably, this lineage had recently begun to, I would argue, kind of have a better claim because they are the more recent royal line. And they were recognized by Edward the Confessor as his successors, or at least Harold II was. And he was elected by the, I guess you could say, Parliament of England. So, and the other thing is that Harold had technically, in a way, ruled over England for a good chunk of almost, well, for quite a few years, actually, before he passed, before the conquest. That said, it does make sound politics to ally with the Wessexian line. And so you have Henri, who married into this family, and thus finally secured some legitimacy for the Norman line, because they were not the legitimate monarchs, and they had to constantly prune the tree, so to speak. That is to say, do a lot of nasty, nasty little massacres and genocide in England to keep their throne, because,
That's the thing to do.
yeah, like the harrowing of the North, which took place, I think, in the 1080s by Guillaume le Conquérant. Wasn't a fun time for the English. He clear-cut an entire chunk of the North.
Unpleasant.
Yeah, it wasn't a very nice thing to do. Actually, it was very uncalled for, even in regards to a rebellion. He kind of took it out of proportion. But it was the thing he kind of liked to do. That said, and I know if people say you're rambling or you're bad-mouthing Guillaume le Conquérant, have you read about the guy? He was alone. Sorry, I shouldn't judge him by today's standards. He was a bastard and a mass-murdering psycho. Yeah.
And a loon.
And a loon. So now I'm judging him by their standards. Actually, a lot of people back then thought he was a nasty piece of work. But he, on the other hand, Henri was very well loved because he brought good rule, good administration to England. And his wife was a really good ruler. Well, ruler's wife, I should say. She was a good queen. Henri was also very fertile. He had 24 kids. So, I guess you could say he was more red pill than red pills.
He loved this woman.
Oh, yeah. More than anything else in life. But he also loved his kids.
Mm-hmm.
He was a doting father. Mostly to his illegitimate children, I think. I believe he had a home in Woodstock, England, where most of his kids were brought up, actually as family members to each other, despite most of them coming from different moms. Anyways, at the time of the collapse of the White Ship, there was accompanying Guillaume the Aetheling, Richard de Lincoln, you had Mathilde, Comtesse de Pauch, both of them illegitimate children of Henri's. You had, of course, Etienne, who was supposed to be aboard, as mentioned. It's going to prove to actually be a disaster in history for him not having been aboard, because he's the little jerk who ended up deciding, I have a claim. No, you don't. I'm going to jump over my older brother. You really shouldn't do that. And I'm going to be King of England. Oh, boy. Even though I don't have the willpower to really force my authority upon all the shires and upon all the nobility. Yeah. Etienne proves to be a disaster. You had, of course, Richard, the Earl of Chester, and his wife Maud. And you have Geoffroy Ridel, a judge, an English one, a very competent one, apparently. I'm going to guess because he worked under Henri le Premier, who was very competent. I really like Henri. Othver, or wait, I should pronounce it, I think in an English manner, Othver, as it sounds more Anglo-Saxon than French. So Othver, who was tutor to the prince, along with a lot of cousins, friends, and royal officials aboard the ship. And you have, of course, the owner of the White Ship was Thomas Fitzstephen, and he had pleaded for the honor to host the crown prince on his boat and sent him along on the said ship. Wait till he finds out that they sunk his ship. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. This is actually something horrible. But it's just, when you think about, he invested in this boat. It was his pride and joy. Oh boy, bucko, aren't you gonna live to regret that? Anyways, a little Schadenfreude, that's all. No wonder the English hate us French. We have so much Schadenfreude even towards our own kind. Even towards our own ancestors. Actually, if I was related to this guy, I'd kind of laugh. And cry. We could have had a boat. Darn. Nah, Atheling. Actually, no. We're not. I don't think we're related. Anyways. You've got Guillaume Atheling, who was married to Mathilde. There's a lot of those, by the way. And Mathildes. That is to say Mathildes. Lots of ladies with both names in this time. Probably all named after the queen consort. Anyways, Mathilde was married to Guillaume in 1119 AD, and she is daughter of Fulk V d'Anjou. He was Comte d'Anjou, and later Roi de Jérusalem, or later King of Jerusalem. So, pretty impressive guy. Pretty cool guy. Very interesting history with him. We'll get to that eventually. Either in this podcast or in another. Because I do have one planned on all the nobles of this era. This is the thing about this semi-warring states period of France, which spans from probably around the year 900 or 892 thereabouts AD up to arguably Philippe Auguste II's victory over the English in 1215. Well, the English and the Germans. I have to rub it into the Germans' faces. We did beat you. Haha. Anyways. If you're sore about it, haha. Anyways. Ça arriva que Guy had... I shouldn't call him by that. That makes it sound like I'm his pal. Guillaume had apparently spent a good chunk of the past year studying under Daddy throughout Normandy. This was to prepare him for kingship. And he was returning home, obviously, because Daddy wanted him close by. Now, the trouble with Guillaume is that he was spoilt, arrogant, and had basically been pampered his entire life. And what's more is that, on the other hand, he had... Dan Jones comments that he had good reason to feel pretty pleased with himself because he just spent a year going through, I guess you could say, grad school of kingship. He paid homage for Normandy, becoming the Duc de Normandy, which very, very impressive title there. Actually, do check out the map of Normandy. It's a very large chunk of territory in France, like larger than, I think, some countries. So, and it also has really cool history, so do check it out some more. Anyways, let's see. Now, the man he had paid homage to was Louis VI, often named Louis Gras, or Louis the Fat, because he was kind of fat. Oh, and Louis liked to fat shame other people, just as a side note, despite him being fat. But the French have another name for him, Louis le Glorieux, Louis the Glorious, because this guy was a badass. He could win battles like you wouldn't believe. And he was a tough soldier. He was a man's man, despite being fat. I have to keep referencing that, because the English keep mentioning that he's fat. I could mention it more times than they could.
Yeah.
But actually, what the English should remember is he was glorious as well.
All right.
Now, what's more is Orderic Vitalis, Orderic Vitalis, would claim that the white ship was excellently fitted out and ready for royal service. And
but we have here the perfect example of one of the earliest moments of the dangers of drinking and driving.
Yeah, I guess so. Because the ship was excellently fitted out and ready for royal service. So, and it took Okay, so it took them some time to prep it and to set up a crew of 50 and a cargo of treasure and to get the 100 passengers aboard. Only took probably half an evening for Sonny Boy to smash it into the rocks. You know, this is why we need licenses for driving and for boating.
And a designated driver.
Oh, yeah. They could have used that. But the designated driver decided to go back on shore going, nope. And that was Etienne.
And then the backup designated driver got himself drunk, as well as the one after that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, probably. Anyways, apparently the area where they hit became known as Quillebeuf on page 6. Now, I'm not from France, so I've never seen this area. I would love to. I'm serious. Although not too close. I don't want to see it as closely as this Princey did. And the thing about Quillebeuf, if I could find it on the damn page, is that it's a sharp, rocky outcrop. And it apparently still stands today and is still visible at the mouth of the harbor. So that's the thing about Dan Jones. He does visit the areas he mentions in his book. And that's something I do really respect. Now, I can't do it because I don't have university funding like he does. And I'm also poor. So no traveling across the Atlantic to go cruise the Channel and generally enjoy France or England or Ireland or Écosse to myself. Some people just have all the luck. I'm joking. Guillaume would try to save himself and would be saved by some guys on a boat who, you know, you kind of have to save the prince. But then he decided to screw them over, although his intentions were good, when he heard his sister screaming and crying out. Unable to bring himself to abandon his half-sister, he would, in complete contradiction to George R.R. Martin's really crappy, weird logic about, legitimate and bastard siblings always hate each other. A few times in history, sure, but there have been times when half-siblings throughout history treat each other as family. But, you know, George R.R. Martin's going to Martin. And never smarten up. But anyways, you've got Guillaume who goes back for his beloved sister, only for other people to suddenly jump aboard because they don't want to die. And the boat topples over and sinks into the waves, drowning them all. And only one man survived the whole thing. A butcher who had gone aboard to cash in on some debts when they decided to drag him along against his will. Wow, poor guy. But he clung to a piece of timber and drifted ashore, where he recounted the entire story. As to the English side of the channel, when they received the news, most of the nobles were shocked and didn't tell the king and were scared of telling him for fear that he might say off with their heads. But what they forgot was that he's not actually related to the Queen of Hearts from Wonderland, so he wouldn't actually do that. But in turn, they showed how brave and manly they were by sending in a little boy who's, I guess, dispensable to go tell the king and risk his wrath. Kid actually got spared.
Yeah.
Henry didn't do anything.
Because the kid was the messenger. Sure, the kid, according to the book, was in tears himself. But
yeah, and apparently Henri fell to the ground in grief. And more than one source relates that Henri never smiled again. Such was his grief and sorrow at the loss of his children. And he lost 3 of them and lost quite a few other family members and people he was close to. Like, this is a huge chunk of his nobility and all of his lifelong dreams of stability for his realm shattered in a single evening of drunk driving. But what's worst is that Henri had always been a king set on consolidation. His goal was not to expand the territories that he controlled. No, no, no. That he would leave to others. His view was, I'm not interested in that. I just want to preserve Normandy in England. That's all. Maybe I'll get the Scots on side because I really don't want any war with them because he's got enough trouble in France, especially with Louis VI not wanting him to have both Normandy and England because Louis VI realized, you cannot have a Duc de Normandy who is connected by family with the basically blood feuding enemies of Normandy, the Comte d'Anjou, who are just as powerful and dangerous as Normandy, tied together, and with the Duc de Normandy also being King of England. And on top of that, Blois is basically connected to Normandy. So this is a situation where this is just disaster for the Capet family, who would rule France from 987 up to, 1792 thereabouts, and then get another shot at it after Napoleon, and then would get kicked off the throne again, because why not? And hey, when you have a king on the throne, you have to ask yourself, why not kick him off at some point? After all, it's no fun if you have a consistent government. I mean, I may be French, but even I get the urge to, maybe we should shift from, parliamentarian government to Republican. You know what? This isn't much fun. Let's shift to empire. No, you know what? Let's shift to no government. Okay, that doesn't work. Back to Republic, or maybe an empire. I don't know. We can't make up our minds. Actually, from what I understand, there are some saying, let's go back to monarchy. Which has me just going, oh boy, this is funny. Actually, if we get an old-style Capet family monarchy who treat war like it's a sport and go hunting and all that jazz again, I'm actually going to say I support it, if only they'll agree to be my artistic patrons. And because I think it would be funny. Wow, come on. We tried 200 years thereabouts of Republican empires. Let's try out a kingship. Who knows? Can't be worse than what's currently on there. But the truth of the matter is that this was a very upsetting time for not just Henri, but for the rest of the English nobility as they realized how fragile they are. This was a moment of realization as they came very directly into contact with their own mortality. For Louis VI, it was a time that is also known as early Christmas, as it basically knocked Henri off his feet and onto his rear and weakened his claims. Because the thing is, a monarch, any person in a position of power is vulnerable if they do not have an heir in the wings. And never is this more clear than under a monarchy. And under the monarchies of this era and their unwritten rules, Ali is in a very vulnerable position. He cannot actually risk, for example, going into the front lines too often because he doesn't have a clear heir. Now, Ali would get the brilliant idea that maybe there is an heir, or rather, heiress, as here's the thing. The English had previously, under the Kingdom of Mercia, had the Lady of Mercia, Aethelflaed, and who had ruled as essentially a monarch. And what is more is that there was no loi salique, or Salic law, like in France. In France, the king's daughter cannot inherit and she cannot pass on a claim. Under Salic law, women cannot inherit crowns and some stuff. Yeah, I know it seems sexist. It is. But the truth of the matter is that The English never bought into this idea. They were much more Germanic. So, in that regard, women could inherit. The French were a weird mixture of Celtic and Latin. And the thing is, the German was bred out of them centuries before, with the shift from the Merovingians to the Carolingian. And what's more is that the French would never truly reconcile themselves to the idea of rule by woman. Despite the fact that, honestly, you had good female regencies like Blanche de Castile that would crop up later on in history. I mean, she did a great job for St. Louis. She was a bit of a jerk to her daughter-in-law, but she was a great regent. You had Jeanne d'Arc, who led the army well during what was essentially an almost interregnum, as even her liege lord had no interest in actually being a proper liege lord. You have countless other women who would do a great job helping France get back on its feet whenever she's in trouble. But you also, arguably, si tu regardes the fact that the French were very reluctant to vote Marine Le Pen in some cases, it's part of the psychology of our people. And it's just the way it is. And yet, ironically, France was one of the first countries to give women quite a few rights around the year 1800. So, go figure. We're just nothing but oxymorons. But no comments about morons, actually. Please no. We get enough of those. And the thing is, the English, though, would decide they never wanted the loi salique. They weren't reasonable like the French were. But honestly, on the other hand, duchies could pass down through the female line. And so, because of this, what the English were able to argue was that they could pass both through to Mathilde. That is to say, the daughter of Henri le Premier. Many oaths were sworn to her, but the goal was never really her, but Henri II, her son, who would be father to Richard, or Richard the Lionheart, and to Jean, or John, King John of the Robin Hood myths, even though the Robin Hood myths would actually be originally set in the reigns of one of the Edwards. Go figure. But the truth is, Mathilde was not the goal. She was a means to an end to get another male monarch of the lineage of Henri. And quite a few lords of England actually didn't have a problem with this. They saw it as, okay, this is a pretty good deal. This keeps the stability of things, like we're staying in the royal line. No hiccups. But the problem is, there were wolves disguised as sheep. You had some, like Etienne, who were keen for the throne. You had David, who kind of saw this as a means to, once he was king of Scotland, to grab a huge chunk of the north of England. And for a time he did succeed because of Etienne's incompetence. But also David kind of backstabbed his niece, Mathilde, and showing that for all his piety, he could be as ruthless as a coyote. But on the other hand, can't blame a guy for trying.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the English were to do much the same at a few points in history. So it's only fair. And besides, it's not as though Mathilde did much to ingratiate herself with her uncle, as she was later to show herself to be a little incompetent at one point. So this is a very complicated period, and this is arguably the opening act for what would be called the Shipwreck of England, or the Anarchy Wars of England. And it's called the Anarchy Wars because it was anarchic. But what's more is that there's a great novelization, though it gets a few things wrong, of this period that is actually more about the construction of a cathedral by Ken Follett, arguably his magnum opus, and probably one of the greatest books written in the past half a century, and probably the greatest book of the 80s, Pillars of the Earth. What did you think of this opening act?
A little horrifying because essentially, you had the heir and all the spares dying in one night.
Yeah, although it has to be acknowledged that Henri le Premier did not have many legitimate sons. Most of his sons were illegitimate, such as Robert of Gloucester, and even slips my memory right now, but even I think it was Ranulph. I think it was. Well, he has another son of Cornwall. Well, he's Earl of Cornwall, and he would prove very loyal to Mathilde. I think he was Earl of Cornwall. But, anyways, you have several other of the children of Henri who would prove very loyal to Mathilde. Gloucester was not very loyal at first. He wanted to hedge his bets, kind of selling out his sister to get a little ahead. Then when it was clear to him that Etienne had no intention of elevating him in court, he switched sides. It was more convenient. But he had a half-brother who was clearly intent on getting Mathilde on the throne. Kudos to him. He gets Brother of the Year award. Although which year, I'm not clear. I'm joking. But this is a very, very complicated time. And it's a very tragic time for many involved, as no one would suffer more from this terrible interregnum period than, sadly, the peasants. And this war was so bad, so violent, that it was said that it was the time when saints slept. Wow, that's horrible. And if you actually pay attention, I've only just started reading Redwall, but if you actually pay attention, there's some inspiration taken from this period for the Redwall books. That's how violent this era is. It is. Like, the thing is, Henri le Premier wanted to leave his kingdom intact. He did not want an untidy civil war or anything. He did not want Normandy and England sinking into conflict and suffering. For all his faults, one might be able to argue there was a touch of goodness in him. And ultimately, his people suffered atrociously. The people in Normandy would be subjected to Angevin invasion, during which many people were, we'll say, abused, as Anjou took the province by force under Geoffroy Plantagenet. Although arguably the Plantagenets would later derive more characteristics from their matriarch, Mathilde, who had a terrible temper. You guys will see. This lady could be, well, let's just say that Batman in modern superhero stories has nothing on her. Even the Red Hood is tame compared to her. The Shadow would quake and hide and quiver and cry like a baby before her. Is how violent she could be. Thankfully, she mellowed in her later years. But the trouble is that this, yeah. So we're going to leave it there as we've stretched this out long enough. So just know we're currently at 1120, and we're going to be reaching the next few years, the 1120s, during the next chapter, Henri le Premier is going to try to circumnavigate the treacherous waters, so to speak, the political waters and international waters of European politics, with a lot of rocks all around him, because he's got to find a way to get an heir and a spare and try to retain his crown and pass his crown down. If he was not fully successful, it's not because he was stupid or because he failed. Arguably, he did better than what most monarchs could have done. And in regards to the succession, while, for example, Augustus Caesar was a more accomplished politician and historic figure, Augustus did not handle the passing of the crown quite half so well as Henri. Charlemagne would not handle it quite so well, to an extent, as well, despite his evident brilliance. Because Charlemagne would pass it on to Louis, but Louis had the problem of many, many rebellious sons who had no intention of listening to their father. Henri le Premier would handle it, to an extent, with more class and dignity than most monarchs of any age. So if you enjoyed this video, be it on Storyfire, on YouTube, or Substack, don't forget to smash that like, share this video, and smash that subscribe button as though you were the white ship smashing into the rocky outcroppings.